Good afternoon, everyone. The anomalies, 1700s Louisburg Star Fort, 11.5 million cubic feet of stone in the walls. Reconstructed in the modern day, give this look, take the stars away. These giant mansions, that was to house the troops. Apparently only 8,000 bricks were brought in, plus construction materials were substandard at the fort location, yet we're seeing a 2-mile long wall, 30 feet high, 36 feet thick, all deconstructed by the British just magically after a treaty signing, or the story goes. 1960s, wow, let's have a national park there, historical site. There was already some ruins left. You can see the thickness of the walls. 1930s, pre-World War II aerial photographs showed very defined bastion walls of the Star Fort. Inexplicable. Millions of blocks to build the walls around. They still can't explain that. But the reconstruction is so pitiful in comparison to the original. And even in the 1950s photos, you see something had disappeared since the 1930s. A rearrangement of the land. Lithographs show a hilled city with multiple cathedrals and massive walls to the seaside against invasion. Original settlement, 1713, Havre. Put that into your search engine. What pops up? Havre de Grace, another Star Fort. Entrance into the rivers heading up to Paris. And what I can't believe is the French didn't sail a few miles further down coast and come into that deep water bay at Halifax. Planting the flag to claim Nova Scotia, there's a Star Fort there too. Just makes you wonder, did they re-inhabit what was already there? That was the easiest play to establish themselves in the New World. All of this Biden inflation tax talk, what's it really about? And more importantly, what's the actual effect of inflation on the lives of real people? Joe Biden claims that it's indisputable that his jobs plan is working. This data unequivocally shows that it's not. Well, at least for American workers. Rather, inflation is surging, and more than wiping out any wage gains these workers might have experienced. And historically, when inflation spikes, commodities like gold, silver, lumber, and real estate surge. Learn how simple it is to add physical gold and silver to your portfolio ahead of the rise in inflation and predicted price rises. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no fee for life IRA. Call 1-800-356-4470 and get a free investor guide today. And with the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer from 2016 to present, click on the link in the description box below for more information. And now on with the video. Star Forts. There are many around our world. And I watched a video from John Levy just the other day. You might want to check out his channel, a bastion of information, since we're talking about bastions tonight. This one in Norway, Fredrikstad, usually surrounded by water, some type of water involved. So I want to start with some anomalies and just present some information. I'll let you come to your own conclusions. We're in the world of madness right now. I thought I'd take a break. Let's step back 400 years. To the end of the Maunder Minimum and see what had happened in the early 1700s, how people came out of this grand solar minimum. Suddenly the French are over in Nova Scotia. The map here, massive piece of land there to have been colonized. But the French chose to stay far up in Louisburg. They didn't go into Halifax. What they did was colonized a very small piece of land into a very small bay as the largest trading port along the eastern seaboard at that time, north. But this is the reconstruction after the Canadian government had, since the 1960s, put something back together and created a national monument for it. That building that you see was to house the troops. Now we are going to go through some lithographs, paintings, and reconstructions of that time era with the battles and what the city, the garrison, the bastion looked like is nothing what is described in current terms. The reconstruction was based on trying to make it as authentic as it was at the time. But when you go back into these descriptions, lithographs, there were far more buildings, far larger and much more widespread, with the walls around the city that dwarf what can be reconstructed today. Nonetheless, beautiful, and I look at that and say, that was for the troops? Wow, I would like to be troop stationed in that at the time, 1730s. But we'll use this map right here from 1758 as a good example. By that point, it was supposed to have been torn down by the British, at least the walls, after the treaty in 1748. So when I look at this map 10 years later, fully intact walls, I'm going to question the historical timelines on this. And if you follow all the way around, the garrison is incredibly built. Sea fortifications, land fortifications, all sides. The only way you can come to it is after you enter the bay. I guess you could come the open ocean route, smashing into the rocks with the waves, but most people wouldn't do that. Cannons along the entire front there. But what they don't show is the cannons facing seaward, which is a mystery in itself. So as the experts are claiming, the fortification took French builders 28 years and 2.5 miles surrounding the entire fort, 30 feet high, 36 feet wide. I'm going to cut it down to 2 miles just so we can do even math. So each mile of square footage moving around the periphery of that is 5.7 million cubic feet of masonry that would need to be put in place. So a full 2 miles around there, you're looking at 11.4 million cubic feet of rock that needed to be moved into place. In 1713, through swamps and a portion of the area you couldn't build, it would be too cold. It's in Canada. But some of these portraits are coming out of different museums, and they're showing the French port of Louisburg. This is 1758 with another battle going on. But look at the sea fortifications in the height of the walls. City inside. So the beginning of the reconstruction was all based on these models from what had been seen in paintings, descriptions of people living there, commanders, etc. So they put all this information and data point together, and they said, this is what it looked like. And they set out to reconstruct this in the 1960s. Very cleanly defined on how large those walls are. And if you look at the Louisburg nautical map here, clearly visible right on the tip there of the peninsula. Offshore you'll have an island, which we'll look at in just a minute. The bay's not very wide, not very deep, not very long, and it's incredibly remote. You are at the end of Nova Scotia, Atlantic Ocean, and you're heading over to Europe. That's it. Yet if you were to travel down coast, just a sliver in nautical terms, you would have come into Halifax. Deep water ports, container terminals there now, complete anchorage, massive possibilities for expansion, populations to live there, build out factories, do everything you needed to bring a society up, yet they chose Louisburg at the end of the landmass. So remote, so difficult to get there. 1759 map for you here. They chose not to come. Why did they not make it here? They were there first 50 years earlier, yet they didn't choose this as an anchorage point for their vessels. They put a port along the anchorage area at Dauphin. What do we see again? A star fort. Claims were by 1735 or so, the walls were falling apart because there was so much cannon fire coming off of that. But I find it strange that if you're going to be protecting the river, that your fortification is facing toward the land. You know, if you're going to build this as a military strategist, it should be the other way around, or actually fully enclosed. Why would you leave access from the river to come in the backside of your garrison. That makes no sense. But if it was there already and you just moved in, that would make a lot more sense. Previous reset, grand solar minimum reset, perhaps. So a wide view here of Nova Scotia all the way to Louisburg with the yellow pin. You see, the French, they could have chosen to come down to many anchorage points further south and west. More protected, larger areas for expansion, like I say. But they chose not to come down to Halifax, which has a star for it, by the way. It's called the Halifax Citadel, Fort George, more properly. It's smaller than others that are seen around the world, but, as quoted here, the first citadel to establish a presence in Nova Scotia as a counterbalance to French stronghold of Louisburg. Now, wait a second. The French were there at least 40 years before that. They couldn't have come down in. See, there's a lot of things in history that just don't make sense here. Lithograph from 1853, Halifax, and of course the star fort's right there, along with the waterfront. I linked everything below so you can chase down the maps, etc. But when I look at something like this, and the French could get all the way to Quebec, but they missed the major safe harbor point, I question how true some of these handovers are and some of these timelines could be. Now, jumping back to Louisburg here, you can see the thickness of the walls. That's the original thickness that encircled the entire fort at the time, 2 miles plus, as the wall around that with those living inside. So the National Historic Site was only 1/4 partially reconstructed. Now, if it was that easy to build it in 1713, 1714, 1720, could we not, with machines, cranes, cars, and trucks, now build it in just a fraction of the time that it could have been built with horse and wagon in the early 1700s? The walls were constructed approximately in 20 years. That's with people chipping with chisels and delivering by horse. Should be able to do it way faster. And here's another little nugget that might intrigue you. The brick sizes at the fortress. Now, during that time, construction period, 1713 into the 1730s, French builders had to get bricks from New England. They couldn't produce them on site. The mortar was terrible as well. The consistency, the kilns, they didn't fire correctly, so they had to import their bricks. They imported 8,000 bricks through 1722. Now, you're telling me that they're trying to build an entire garrison with 8,000 bricks. And even if you dig into some of the archaeological findings and discussions, the masonry materials were also imported. Although fieldstone, beach stone, and rough-cut stone of local production were used for a majority of wall building, large quantities of limestone and sandstone were imported from France for more finished work. So I'm trying to envision the supply chain here. They barely had enough ships to bring food over for the garrisoned soldiers along with ammo. Yet somehow they're able to bring all these building materials, limestone, sandstone, just send the ships. We're building this thing here. And how many people would it take full time to carve out of rock, even in the local bedrock in the local area? 11 million cubic feet. So the reconstructions, again, off the description of the original structure. Look how thick and girthy that is. There's frontal walls before you get to the main structure, and the gates. The gates give it away too. They mimic something out of France. They're far out of place of what we would expect in a frontier town. You know, people trapping for pelts is what we were told this was. Now here's some actual lithographs going back into mid-1700s. Lighthouse is an incredible, important feature, along with that little island with some housing on it straight off the lighthouse. But you're going to take a look over at Louisburg. Those 2 points coming out, those are significant structures of the time. And it looks like the entire city is raised. But when we look at modern images of it, that's a flatland. So there's a huge disconnect from what has happened topography-wise. Since that time to now, it has been leveled. I mean leveled, except for what's been reconstructed. So the conventional history goes like this. After a siege, in 1748, the War of the Austrian Succession ended, and this led to other conflicts, and by 1758, British forces in the Seven-Year War, which liberated Louisiana, in that treaty was given over the garrison of Louisburg, 1768, and systematically destroyed by British engineers. So the British engineers were able to take 11.5 million cubic feet of carved rock off of that little tiny speck at the end of the islands heading out into the Atlantic Ocean and move it around. I don't think so. What I do think makes more sense is the fortress was torn down and partially reconstructed in the 60s, but I think it started to happen before then. But here's 1758 map. Important points on the map here. We'll go around the clock. 9 o'clock position is the garrison itself. Look at the noontime position. There's another set of fort up there. They call it the battery. And then if we come down to the 3 o'clock position, you're going to see two different sets of military positions. Bottom right is where the lighthouse is. So if you're going to fake paintings, you're not going to get all these specific points in here. So take a look at the colorized version of that same lithograph. Massive buildings in the center there. That's far beyond what we're seeing for two-story building, which is the story of the construction style. I see two-story buildings there, but I also see some massive other construction that is not fitting with what historians are saying. Now that lighthouse, again, if you look off there, that island was also a bastion, and during some attacks, you can see it on fire out there. That matches up topography-wise as well. And then if we look at Google Maps, obviously to the 3 o'clock position there, you can see that same island, and if you zoom down in on that, there's a few roads around there. The lighthouse is there too in the same exact position, so it looks like whoever was doing these lithographs at the time has the same reference points. So this block print here is one of my favorites. So notice the seawalls around, and then how large is that main structure in there. That's the one that was being rebuilt by the Canadian government, but I don't think that's a two-floored structure. If we know the walls were 30 feet tall, even if it was on the hill, and then what's that behind it with the second spire coming out of there? Something is amiss on how large this place was, or what the buildings that were there originally that have been reconstructed, completely destroyed. You see that thing was smashed to smithereens. There's nothing left, nothing of historical record except these lithographs that were luckily saved through history. Now this 1766 drawing, I can only give it a grain of salt because look at the flag size over there. I mean, that's a gargantuan flag. That's larger than the size of a building. So I know they like to, in some of these types of drawings, exaggerate the flag. But again, you'll see the spire has disappeared off the main building. Still exists off to the west or to the left there. But the spire's gone off that largest of buildings. Where did it go? So at the height of that bastion, soldiers, commerce people, traders, etc., there are about 4,200 people in that place, stretching out to Louisburg. And here is an image of Louisburg in the 1960s. You see how much space they need there. And their population, 1,400. So the story goes, in the middle 1700s, there were 4 times more people, but they were squeezed into smaller spaces, and that was it. Where were they going? There were no roads out of there. So this whole thing about that was set as a trading post and onward and this and that. Halifax, absolutely. Louisburg, not so much. Aerial photos pre-World War II. This is the late 1937, I believe, is the image date on this. I linked everything below. You can chase down all the archive images. Definitely defined still with the walls, and you can see the star shape so easily. 1930s. Then we fast forward to 1953. It's not so defined. It's a little bit further away shots here. These are military images. And coming out 1954, what do we see? We don't. The definition of it's gone. We see roads carved there. Fast forward into 1963, and that looks like an excavation site for me. They're making a parking lot there. That's why I was saying, It looked like it was a hilltop fortress where the larger buildings were, but when we fast forward, that's dozers and that's significant, massive, unbelievable earthworks going on there. And they're trying to tell you that this is the reconstruction afterward. And again, I'll bring you back to, it doesn't make sense. They were able to construct such a massive fortress, 300 years with barely any roads with horses and wagons, yet we can't do it with cranes. And then the other anomaly here is, where did all the stone come from? These are not the same imported bricks that came from New England. New England bricks were New England brick. Exactly the same size, exactly the same measurement. You can even see the chisel marks on the side of these blocks that were used to build the 36-foot thick walls. Where did it all come from? Where was the labor force to put this together? I'm going to refresh your memory. This is how big and how vast those walls in the complex was. And this is the pace of the reconstruction. History does not match technology on this one. Absolutely not. So we come back into the late 1960s, early 70s. We're getting into the construction. So some of you who are in the construction business, movement of materials, if you could describe how complex it is to build such large structures, it's like they're building a small Disneyland hotel there. In addition to the walls, notice how it's completely flat now? They leveled it out. It goes from 30 feet down to 10 feet. You can look it up on Google Earth and see where the elevation is. But those prior photos look like it was a hilltop complex in there. Final reconstruction is something just like this, according to the previous descriptions. But the spire was much taller and larger, and that should rise up much further, at least 3 to 4 floors off the images we saw earlier, those lithographs. Aerial fortress, Louisburg. Massive, massive structure. Oh, wait, that was just to house the troops, nothing else. And the Canadian Post Office putting out here a reconstruction set of diagrams off of whoever had done engineering schematics in the early 1700s of that fort. These types of arches met travelers coming in off the seaside. And what are those 2 spires off the sides of the arch, is my question. You're going to that much detail at an outpost where you're supposed to be trading beaver pelts. Really? And we'll come back in here to the British forces sieging Louisburg again. But what do I see? That massive cathedral right in the center, and off to the west, another spire out there. Finished reconstruction looks something like this. I don't see the star formation. I do see the front garrison there, but that's about it. Seawalls. You see the large arch in the back there. That's straight from France. The only time you can see even remotely that something that would have been a star formation, star fort, is from the air. When you look at this as their reconstruction, and then you see this from the 1700s, there's a huge disconnect here in history. And also while I was looking through the information, those of you plasma petroglyphs, Mi'kmaq petroglyphs here, seems that these plasma discharges were sighted worldwide. And also a little extra nugget here right over to France. Originally the fort from Louisburg had the same similar name from Havre. So there were sets of these star forts with Havre nomenclature in them. And put this into a search engine, and what will pop out? The Saga of Valchel. And it goes on to detail Le Havre, the fortifications. This is in France, but then it also talks about what was over in what is now Canada. And if you look at this 1698 map of the Star Fort, that's massive. You're able to sail ships inside there. And then about 60 years later, a new map appears, better rendition. Le Havre, the Citadel. And then I like as we go forward in time into 1810, what has disappeared there? And you'll start to see this disappearance of features of the forts as you move forward in time. This is Le Havre now. You would never know there was anything that vast as a star fort in that city. Even zooming in to where the original star fort was, I just don't see it in there. In this port city of Le Havre, if you follow the river up the Seine, you're going to come into Paris. And as I was looking through this information, Pont Neuf in Paris, 1832. Those are some massive buildings, 1832. Jeez. How many homes are right along the river there? And another glimpse down through Paris, far away from that bridge you saw. How many miles is that of just continuous gargantuan skyscraper buildings in 1832, as far as the eye can see stretching into the distance? And sadly, most were destroyed in World War II. We'll never know what truly went on. But do you think they were building that large of structures in 1832? That would rival anything we can do now. And at the speed they were supposedly able to put these buildings up, we can't do it today like that, even with quick-set concrete. I wonder how they did it then. There's a lot of unanswered questions from the canals of Paris, and the timelines were given for colonization and build-out for trading posts and forts. And are we set for another reset with this new grand solar minimum on our doorstep? Mechanics of a Mud Flood, 2024. And one thing I learned during the research is the garrison there never had enough food. They were always malnourished and low morale because they didn't have food. You got to think about food, storable foods, 25-year shelf life, My Patriot Supply, and Adapt 2030, 3-month emergency food supply. Because the story that they kept bringing over all these masonry materials, yet they didn't bring food to feed the troops, it doesn't make sense for me. Food's the most important thing to keep your society functioning, our civilization moving forward, and your country from collapsing. But they brought sand instead in the ships. I hope you bring storable foods. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you next time.